March 2017. On a bright spring morning, a young college student walked across campus with a light smile, her books pressed against her chest, her steps quick but unhurried. She was like any other student that day, blending into the steady rhythm of lectures, notes, and conversations. In her classroom, she sat quietly, listening, jotting down thoughts, occasionally exchanging a glance or a whisper with the friend beside her. Everything felt ordinary, safe, familiar. But as the final bell rang and the last class dismissed, something shifted. The hallway filled with students rushing toward the doors, laughter echoing through the building, the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Yet, when her classmates looked around, she was no longer there. The seat she had just occupied was empty, her presence already fading like a shadow in sunlight. At first, no one thought much of it. Perhaps she had gone ahead. Perhaps she had taken a different exit. Perhaps she was simply in a hurry. But minutes turned into hours, and hours slipped into the evening, and still, there was no sign of her. Calls went unanswered, messages unread, her dorm room untouched, as if she had stepped out for only a moment and never returned. That ordinary March morning, filled with the promise of spring, became the beginning of a mystery that would shake the campus to its core, a story whispered in corridors, and a haunting question left behind. Where had she gone? Her name was Rachel Morgan, a 20-year-old sophomore at the university, known among her classmates not for being the loudest or the most daring, but for her gentle presence, her quiet smile, and the way she seemed to carry kindness in the smallest of gestures. Rachel grew up in a small town not far from campus, the eldest daughter of a school teacher and a mechanic, a young woman who carried both the warmth of her mother's patience and the resilience of her father's hard work. Those who knew her described her as steady, dependable, the kind of friend who would sit beside you when you were struggling, who would share her notes without hesitation, who remembered birthdays with handwritten cards rather than quick messages on a phone. She lived in a modest dormitory on the east side of campus, a building with faded brick walls and creaking hallways, sharing a small room with another student who often spoke of Rachel's quiet routines, early mornings with coffee and a worn notebook, evenings reading under the soft glow of a lamp. Rachel loved literature. Her professors noticed how she listened more than she spoke, but when she did raise her hand, her thoughts carried a depth that surprised them. Her essays were filled with careful reflections, words that revealed how she saw the world not only as it was, but as it could be, gentler, more forgiving, more human. Outside of class, Rachel often took walks around campus, especially in the late afternoons when the light softened and the air turned cool. She liked the quiet corners of the library, the benches beneath the old oak trees, the hidden paths where she could breathe and think. Friends sometimes teased her for being old-fashioned, for not spending much time on social media, but Rachel seemed content to live in her own rhythm, unbothered by the constant rush around her. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, there were no signs, at least none that anyone could recognize. She attended her classes as usual, met her friends for coffee, and even called home twice a week, just as she always did. Her parents said her voice sounded cheerful, steady, reassuring them that she was doing well. Her roommate remembered Rachel humming softly at night, organizing her books, leaving little notes on sticky pads to remind herself of assignments. And yet, there were moments small, fleeting, when something in her eyes seemed distant, as if her thoughts wandered far beyond the walls of the university. One classmate recalled Rachel staring out of the window for longer than usual, her pen resting idly on the page. Another noticed she had begun carrying her backpack more carefully, almost protectively, as though it contained something important she never wanted to lose. At the time, these details seemed insignificant, brushed aside as quirks of a thoughtful young woman. But after Rachel Morgan vanished, every memory became a clue, every habit a question, and every smile a haunting reminder of what was about to be lost. March 6, 2017, began like so many other days in Rachel Morgan's life. The air on campus was cool, touched by the faint promise of spring, and students hurried between buildings with coffee in hand, voices rising and fading in the morning light. Rachel woke early, as she always did, brewed a small cup of coffee in the shared dorm kitchen, and sat by the window with her notebook open, scribbling a few lines before gathering her books. Her roommate remembered that Rachel smiled faintly before leaving, a calm, unhurried presence in the bustle of the day. Her first class was literature, her favorite. She walked across the quad with her backpack close against her shoulder, pausing briefly under the oak trees before slipping into the building. Inside the classroom, she took her usual seat near the middle row, greeted her professor with a polite nod, and spent the hour jotting down notes in her small, neat handwriting. Classmates recalled nothing unusual. Rachel listened quietly, glanced out of the window a few times, and once let out a small laugh at something whispered by a friend beside her. By late morning, her second class ended, and the room emptied in a wave of footsteps and chatter. Students filed into the hallway, calling to one another, their voices echoing against the tiled walls. But in that sudden rush of movement, Rachel seemed to dissolve. One moment she was gathering her books, the next, she was gone. No one remembered seeing her walk out. One noticed her heading toward the stairs. She simply vanished into the flow of students, and by the time the building grew quiet again, her presence had already slipped into absence. At first, nothing seemed alarming. Friends assumed she had gone to the library or perhaps returned to her dorm. Her professors expected to see her later in the week. But as the afternoon stretched on, messages sent to her phone remained unanswered, and calls rang into silence. By evening, her roommate grew uneasy. Rachel's bed was neatly made, her books arranged in their usual careful order, her lamp turned off. There were no signs of her stopping by, no jacket taken, no belongings disturbed. Her family tried to reach her that night, as they always did twice a week, but the call went straight to voicemail. By the following morning, worry turned into fear. Her professors reported her absence. Her friends admitted they hadn't seen her since class. And her parents, their voices tight with dread, drove down from their small town, arriving on campus with the hope that perhaps she had simply stayed with a friend or lost her phone. But Rachel was nowhere. The police were contacted, a missing person report was filed, and search efforts began almost immediately. Flyers with her photograph, her calm, kind eyes staring back, were posted across campus walls. Students whispered in hushed tones in the dining hall, speculating, doubting, fearing. What haunts those who remember that day is its ordinariness. Nothing had pointed toward danger. Nothing had warned them of what was about to unfold. It was just another morning, just another class, until Rachel Morgan stepped out of sight and never came back. When Rachel Morgan's disappearance was officially reported, the university campus shifted from its normal rhythm of lectures and chatter to an atmosphere of unease and suspicion. Flyers with Rachel's face appeared on bulletin boards, taped to lamp posts, and slipped under dorm doors. The image showed her with a soft smile, her brown hair falling to her shoulders, her eyes calm and thoughtful. Beneath the photograph, bold letters pleaded, "Missing. Have you seen Rachel Morgan?" The police began their work methodically. They retraced her last known steps, starting with the classroom where she had last been seen. Officers spoke with students who had attended the lecture that morning, asking the same questions again and again. Did anyone see her leave? Did she seem troubled? Did she mention going anywhere? The answers were frustratingly vague. Some said they saw her gathering her books. Others thought she had already slipped into the hallway. No one could recall a detail sharp enough to hold on to. Her dorm room was inspected next. Everything inside appeared untouched, her jacket hanging neatly by the door, her books stacked on the desk, her phone charger still plugged into the wall. The bed was made. Her notebook lay open with half a page of writing, as if she had intended to return. Nothing was missing except Rachel herself. Outside the building, search teams combed through campus grounds. They checked the library, the dining halls, the student union, even the quiet pathways Rachel was known to walk in the afternoons. Police dogs were brought in, their handlers guiding them across fields and wooded edges of the university property, but the dogs caught no consistent scent. It was as though Rachel had dissolved into thin air. Her family arrived that same day. Her mother, a school teacher used to keeping her voice steady in front of classrooms, now trembled as she spoke to officers, clutching a photograph of Rachel as a child. Her father, a mechanic who had always believed in fixing what was broken, stood helplessly beside her, unable to mend what had gone missing. They walked the campus grounds with the search teams, calling Rachel's name into the fading light, their voices swallowed by the wind. In the evenings, volunteers gathered. Friends handed out flyers downtown, while students lit candles in a silent vigil near the oak trees Rachel had loved. Professors paused lectures to acknowledge her absence, their words heavy with a grief that felt premature but unavoidable. Despite the effort, no solid lead emerged. There were no security camera recordings of Rachel after she left class, no financial transactions on her bank account, no phone activity. It was as if every trace of her had been deliberately erased. Rumors began to ripple through the campus. Some whispered that Rachel had chosen to leave, that she had grown weary of school and slipped away quietly. Others insisted something darker had happened, something hidden beneath the surface of university life. But for her parents, none of these theories mattered. They clung only to hope that Rachel would walk through the dormitory doors again, her familiar smile breaking the silence, her absence revealed as some misunderstanding. But the days stretched on, one after another, each evening closing without answers. The campus was restless, the family broken, and the police, though persistent, found themselves with nothing but questions. 2 weeks passed. The search for Rachel Morgan stretched from campus lawns to the wooded trails beyond, from nearby towns to quiet bus stations. Each day began with determination and ended in silence. Her family stayed near the university, clinging to hope even as the days piled into a weight that seemed unbearable. Then, in mid-March, something shifted. It happened when maintenance workers were called to inspect a leaking pipe in one of the older academic buildings. The structure was a place few students frequented, with narrow staircases, peeling paint, and a basement long considered forgotten. The air down there was damp, carrying the heavy smell of rust and dust. Workers moved aside stacks of broken chairs and boxes, pushing deeper into the dimly lit corridor, until one of them noticed something half buried in the shadows. A backpack. It was worn, faded at the corners, but unmistakably Rachel's. The workers immediately contacted police, and within an hour, the basement became the center of an investigation. Officers cordoned off the area, their flashlights cutting through the gloom as they documented every inch. Inside the backpack were Rachel's belongings, her notebooks filled with neat handwriting, her favorite pen clipped to the cover, a water bottle she always carried. There was also her student ID card, slightly scratched but clearly hers, and a few folded papers with notes from her last classes. The sight of those objects, so ordinary yet so personal, chilled everyone present. Rachel's life, contained in a few familiar items, had been left abandoned in a place she had no reason to visit. The basement itself seemed almost staged for unease. Low ceilings pressed down, pipes rattled faintly overhead, and dust clung to every surface. Officers described the atmosphere as oppressive, as though the space had held its breath for years, waiting for this grim discovery. Her parents were notified and brought to the building. Her mother broke down at the sight of the bag, clutching it against her chest, as though holding her daughter again. Her father stood silently, his hands trembling, his face locked in an expression that betrayed both fury and despair. For them, the discovery was not just evidence, it was a cruel reminder that Rachel had been close, unimaginably close, all along, and yet unreachable. The investigation intensified. How had the backpack ended up here? Who had placed it in a basement corner, out of sight? Could Rachel herself have left it? The possibilities spiraled into confusion. Police combed through security footage, but the building's cameras were limited and outdated, showing little more than grainy images of students passing in hallways above. No one could be seen entering the basement with a bag. Some officers suggested Rachel might have wandered down there herself, perhaps seeking a quiet place to think, but those who knew her dismissed the idea. Rachel avoided dark, enclosed spaces, preferring the open air of campus lawns or the quiet comfort of the library. Others whispered a darker explanation that someone else had taken her belongings, deliberately hiding them in a place that would only be found later. The discovery spread quickly through the campus community. Students gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed, their eyes flickering with fear. Flyers that once pleaded for sightings now became haunting reminders. Her picture staring out, her belongings proving she had been here. Yet she was still gone. The basement, once ignored, now became a symbol of unanswered questions. Every corner seemed to hold secrets, every shadow a possibility. For Rachel's family, the discovery deepened the pain. It confirmed she had not simply walked away. Something had happened, something hidden, and her belongings were the only silent witnesses. As investigators carried the backpack out of the basement, the cold reality sank in. Rachel Morgan's story was no longer just about a disappearance. It had become a mystery buried beneath the very heart of the campus, one that whispered of darkness where no one had thought to look. The discovery of Rachel Morgan's belongings in the basement did not bring clarity, it deepened the shadows. With her backpack and notebooks now in police custody, the community began to ask questions that had no easy answers. And slowly, theories began to take shape, whispered in dorm rooms, debated in hushed tones between lectures, and passed along like fragments of rumor in the dining hall. The first theory suggested that Rachel herself had placed the bag there. Perhaps she had felt overwhelmed, burdened by pressures she had never spoken aloud. Students speculated that maybe she had wanted to leave everything behind, to vanish without a trace, and that the basement was her final stop before walking away. But those closest to her resisted this explanation. Rachel loved her family too deeply, they said, to abandon them without a word. She was steady, dependable, the kind of daughter who called home twice a week. To believe she had chosen silence seemed impossible. Another darker theory pointed toward foul play. The basement, after all, was not a place Rachel would have gone willingly. Had someone lured her there? Or worse, had someone used the forgotten space to conceal evidence of what they had done? This idea sent shivers through the campus. Students began to walk in pairs at night, dormitory doors locked earlier than ever, and the once familiar hallways now seemed filled with suspicion. A third possibility emerged, that the basement discovery was staged. Someone, perhaps even from within the university, might have moved Rachel's belongings there to mislead investigators, to make it seem as though she had vanished on her own terms. But why? Who would gain from such deception? Each theory carried weight, yet none could be proven. The police continued their work, but the evidence was thin, and every path seemed to dissolve into uncertainty. Rachel's name lingered in conversations. Her face stared out from posters. Her story held the campus in a grip of unease. In the end, the theories were only shadows cast against a wall, shapes that seemed real until touched, only to vanish into air. And behind them remained the same haunting question that had begun on that March morning. Where was Rachel Morgan? For Rachel Morgan's family, the days after the basement discovery stretched into an endless blur of waiting, searching, and aching silence. Her mother, Linda, remained close to the campus, staying in a small hotel just blocks away. Every morning she rose before dawn, clutching a photograph of Rachel as if it were a lifeline, walking across the grounds where her daughter had once studied, whispering her name into the still air. She spoke softly, as though Rachel might hear, as though she might step out from the shadows at any moment and ease the unbearable weight pressing against her heart. Her father, Daniel, carried his grief differently. He moved through each day with a rigid determination, speaking with investigators, revisiting the basement where Rachel's belongings were found, asking again and again if something had been overlooked. He was a man used to repairing broken engines, fixing what was worn down or lost. But here, there was nothing to fix, only absence. The helplessness aided him, and in quiet moments, when he thought no one was looking, his shoulders shook under the strain of tears he could no longer hold back. Rachel's younger siblings, too young to fully understand the depth of the tragedy, felt the silence of the household more than anything else. They asked when their sister would be coming home, and each time their mother's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. At night, the family gathered in a circle of prayer, clinging to hope, clinging to one another, but also knowing that with each passing day, the chances of Rachel returning safely seemed to slip further from reach. On campus, support poured in, but it could not heal the wound. Students organized vigils, lining the pathways with candles that flickered against the night, their light both comforting and fragile. Professors spoke of Rachel's thoughtful presence, her careful essays, her quiet way of seeing the world. Strangers left flowers near the building where her backpack was found. And yet, no matter how many gestures of kindness appeared, the unanswered question remained, burning more fiercely than ever. The family sat in meetings with detectives, listening as updates turned into repetitions. Leads that seemed promising at first unraveled into dead ends. Security footage yielded nothing new. Witnesses repeated the same vague accounts. Each time, Linda's heart sank lower, the hope in her eyes dimming, though she refused to let go entirely. She told herself Rachel was out there, waiting to be found, waiting to come home. But with each sunrise, hope turned thinner, stretched to its breaking point. For the Morgans, life no longer moved forward. It circled the same place, the same question, the same aching emptiness. Days bled into nights, and nights into days, and still the phone never rang with good news. The waiting itself became the heaviest burden of all, not knowing if Rachel was safe, not knowing if she suffered, not knowing if the search would end with answers or silence. In that endless waiting, the family carried a pain too deep for words, a grief suspended in time, with no resolution, no peace, only the hollow echo of a daughter who had vanished. Years have passed since that fateful March morning, when Rachel Morgan walked out of her classroom and was never seen again. The world has changed in countless ways. Yet for her family, time has felt frozen. Her mother still places a fresh flower by Rachel's photograph every week, whispering her daughter's name as if calling her back home. Her father still finds himself sitting quietly in the garage, staring at the toolbox Rachel once borrowed when she helped him fix things, the silence pressing on his chest like a weight too heavy to bear. The case remains unsolved, and the absence of answers has become its own kind of torment. Families often say that grief is like a wound, but with time it scabs over and life continues. For the Morgans, there is no scab, no closure, only an open wound that refuses to heal. They live each day between hope and despair, caught in a limbo that most of us cannot imagine. Every phone call still makes Rachel's mother's heart race. Every news story about a discovery makes them wonder if this time, finally, it might be her. The belongings found in the campus basement remain the most haunting part of this story. They sit in an evidence locker, mute but powerful symbols of a life interrupted. Each item, a notebook with her careful handwriting, her student ID card, her faded scarf, feels like Rachel reaching out from the shadows, reminding the world she was here, she lived, and she mattered. But none of these things can explain why she vanished, or where she went in those final moments. For the community, Rachel's story lingers as a ghostly reminder of vulnerability. Students still walk past that campus building and glance toward the basement windows, uneasy with the knowledge that something so chilling once unfolded beneath their feet. For them, Rachel's disappearance is not just a mystery, but a warning that even in places we trust, darkness can sometimes find its way in. And so, we are left with haunting questions. Who took Rachel? Why did her belongings appear in such a strange and hidden place? Was it a crime carefully concealed, or something even more inexplicable? Perhaps we may never know. But one truth remains. Rachel Morgan deserves to be remembered, not as a case file or a haunting rumor, but as a daughter, a sister, a young woman full of dreams. She loved literature. She called home faithfully. She was gentle and kind. She was real. To those listening, may her story remind us to hold our loved ones a little closer, to never take ordinary mornings for granted, and to carry forward the names of those still missing. Because sometimes, the only way to fight the silence is to keep telling their stories so that they are never lost to time. Rachel Morgan's voice may have been silenced, but her presence echoes, still in her family's hearts, in the hallways of her campus, and now, in yours. If Rachel's story touched you, please support Last Seen by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it. Together we can keep these stories alive and ensure that those who vanished are never forgotten.